since I just heard a report from somebody near Dallas in Texas, and also desire to share what took place. I'm sending this to you. My younger brother, my dad, and I were visiting my grandfather. He lived on a farm near just outside of Dallas. It was during August, at some point around 1985. I just know the month for sure as we were on summer break. It was around 10 p.m. at night. It was damp from all the excruciating humidity that I wasn't used to. It was hot as hell. We had all the windows open at the time. My brother and I were getting settled down into bed. We had the window open all night long to let somewhat of a stagnant breeze come through. My grandfather and my dad were outside talking on the porch, probably smoking a cigar. It was late, like I said. The night was quiet, and I remember at one point, we eventually fell asleep. In the mountains out behind his house, we heard it. All of a sudden, there was just this loud screaming coming from outside. It sounded like a wild beast or something. It sounded right out of a video game. My brother and I lie there awake. We asked each other if the other person heard it, and we had. We both had. We were scared. It sounded close by, and we had actually never heard an animal like that prior to. We were silent, waiting for it to sound off again. It never sounded a second time. We fell asleep at some point from just being so tired, but we were wired. The next day, we didn't hear our grandfather or father mention anything about the earth-shattering roar that had occurred last night. They had to have heard it. It was so loud. We were on edge still. After getting up and having breakfast, my brother and I went out to explore a little. It was a beautiful day, so we thought, why not? We came to a big pile of brush and bush, which we couldn't see from the direction that we came from. We had thought we saw someone else off in the distance. Then, we realized that it wasn't a person at all that we were looking at. It was walking about 100 to 200 yards away from us, and we finally got a good look at it. We could see it was not a person, bear, or a Bigfoot. This thing had the head of a dog and had a big gorilla body covered in black hair. It was about 8 to 10 feet tall, fur from its head to its toes, and was overly thick and muscular. We watched in astonishment as it walked throughout the open tree line until it was out of sight. We told our grandfather and dad about it and got an interest out of them. We traveled back to the spot we just had the encounter, all 4 of us in total. We even went to the same path over in the trees. We wanted to copy the same path it was traveling and kept hearing something in the distance. We were all really curious now. We could all hear it. It sounded just up ahead of us, so we decided to try and track it in 2 separate groups. We kept traversing up on the path. We couldn't believe what it was we were seeing. A trail of the largest canine prints any of us had ever seen in our lives. They were like dog prints, but huge. We also kept hearing something ahead of us the entire time. We kept venturing back a little ways more to the thicker portion of the woods. This thicker portion of the woods rests upon the downslope of a hill. You have to come out of a cleared timber area and then enter into the thicker portion. This is about 30 minutes from where we were just from. We had been following the large canine tracks through here. We come out of the trees, and we all see the same large dog-headed, gorilla-bodied animal turning into the thicket about 50 yards away, much closer than last time. We all got a pretty good look at it too. My brother and I weren't scared of it, except just really interested that such a thing like that could even exist without us ever knowing about it. My grandfather mentioned he had never seen such an animal before in his life. My sister, who I haven't seen in years, decided to come spend some time with me at the Buffalo National River area. We decided to spend our time at the Hideout Hollow, which is a waterfall in the many waterfalls in the area. My sister and I were stoked to be hiking and spending time together again. We grew up very close. Her career takes her to other states, so I don't see her near as much as I used to. We get out all of our essentials and get everything packed. I always like to be prepared for going out. So does she. We finally get to the parking area of the trailhead and get our stuff out. We start to get out on the trail, and things around us go quiet, when minutes before they were lush with sound. My sister actually stops me and mentions it. I acknowledged her and listened for just a moment. She was right. It was dead quiet around us. I'm not gonna lie, it made my skin crawl at the very moment. Then, we both heard something else. In fact, I know my sister heard it in the same time I did, because both of our eyes grew as big as saucers at the same time. Heavy breathing, and it was coming off in the woods, maybe 10 feet away. Not far from her side of the trail. We could not see anything through the thick brush. I felt very creeped out. My sister whispers to me, "I think we can out-jog it." And what does she do? Instead of going back to the car for safety, she, as quietly and controlled as possible, jogs down the trail further. I can't yell at her because we're trying to be stealthy, so I was left with no other choice but to follow suit. My sister can be very irrational and stubborn in the moment of hard decision making. We moved down the trail quickly and swiftly. The sounds around us were still quiet, but we couldn't hear the breathing anymore. We were both on edge, and we didn't see anybody else around us. That's when, coming around a corner in the trail, we hear brush rustling. We both stop in our tracks and look over at the largest dog we'd ever seen, running and jumping in the trees from branches to branches. Rather large branches, mind you. Except this just wasn't your average dog. I'm very familiar with large dog breeds like Great Danes, St. Bernards, you name it, and other large breeds, but this canine, or what appeared to be canine in appearance, had to have been at least 3 times the size of either of those breeds. It was so enormous, my sister nor I could totally comprehend how the branches it was landing on even began to support its weight. We're talking about a very large animal. It was covered in hair, chocolate brown in color. Long and stringy hair. Face looked black, and the snout looked more... I don't know how to accurately paint the picture, but it kind of reminded me of a crocodile snout. Long, unnatural-looking snout, with lots of teeth coming out the tops and bottoms. It just looked wrong. It seemed to pay no mind to my sister or I, and it never once looked over at us. My sister and I are frozen stiff. Once it's out of sight, I turned to her and said, "What the hell did we just see?" She tells me, "I have no idea." We agreed it was probably best to just leave the trail and go home. I wasn't going to want to stick around and venture further. The thing, whatever we just watched, headed in the direction where the trail goes. On the walk back, I kept thinking maybe it was heading further up the trail to ambush us. Was it the same animal that was watching us just a few minutes prior on the same side of the trail? Things remained quiet the walk back, and my sister and I didn't speak a word to each other. We got back to the car, and I have to make sure that I'm not crazy. I have to make sure that I really saw what I did. I started asking questions to make sure we saw the same thing, and neither of us forgot or saw something different. We agreed that it was on its hind legs. It was brown, it was a lot bigger than us, and it was fast. It had a dog head and a weird-looking snout, and that it was built like a bodybuilder. While we're discussing this, we're just sitting in the car. The car isn't even on, but all of our stuff is loaded, so we're good to go. During a brief pause in conversation, our windows are completely rolled down, and we begin hearing this low, rumbling noise. It's getting louder and louder. It pops up in my head that the rumbling noise we're hearing is actually trees, brush, and branches being moved. Something very large is headed directly towards us. I turned and looked at my sister, who who was as pale as a ghost and wide-eyed. In a nervous tone, I yelled at her to start the car and to go now. Without hesitation, she starts her up and rips out of there fast. I didn't turn around to see if it ever came out of the trees at us, but we both heard something very large heading directly to us. Could it have been what we just saw? We're flying down the road, and now I'm starting to convince myself this is all just crazy. We just saw a bear or something, and we're totally overreacting like crazy. This stuff doesn't happen. My sister, who's not afraid, blatantly interrupts me and asks me, "Do bears run like that? Do bears look like that?" I didn't have anything to say. We just headed home. The event that transpired kind of just ruined any mood we had for hiking and having a good time. During the events, I didn't notice any smells, but since we're talking, I also didn't notice if it was quiet or if any of the birds or bugs were chirping. Only after initially when my sister stopped me did I notice. I know I have no desire to return to the area. I get sick to my stomach anytime I think about it. The real question should be if anybody else had any similar experiences. I've heard that area in particular is a hotbed for Bigfoot sightings and encounters by many friends and people I know. But I don't believe what we saw that day was a Bigfoot. Bigfoot is supposed to look different. This was like a big chocolate-looking black dog. I don't know. I guess I'll never know. Taking a friend home from a long day of drama with an ex-girlfriend of his. He didn't have a car at the time, and I was happy to give him a lift. I came and picked him up, and drove him back to his place, which was about 45 minutes away in total. He lives way out there, so it's quite a beautiful drive, night or daytime. At the time it was dark outside, but the sun hadn't fully set just yet. You could still drive without your headlights and probably be fine. Somewhere along the road, on the side of the tall grass, we saw this dog-like human form walking upright at a fast pace, going up a ridge. The animal crossed the road quickly in a stride or two and up the ridge to our right. It was in full view for a second, maybe two, illuminated by my headlights. I'm not a good estimator of distance, but if I had to guess, maybe 50 yards. It was far enough we weren't going to hit it, but close enough that we could see that it clearly was a humanoid-looking wolf walking on two legs. It was also very large, tall and skinny. I'd guess 8 or so feet. Its waist was slim but had an entirely human body. The only thing it didn't have was a human head. The head was that of a timber wolf. It's like if you took a wolf's head and stuck it on top of the body of a man. Then cover that man in the same kind of fur a wolf has, and there you go. Its fur was very dark in color. It looked to be black, but I could be mistaken. I didn't see the hands or feet, but it had longer, slimmer arms and legs. It was covered completely in this thick hair and had a very human gait to it. The way it moved gave us the impression it was kind of gliding across the road. It was very strange. I've never seen anything glide like that, alive or not. I don't recall seeing any facial details. I don't think it ever noticed our oncoming vehicle. It made no signs of noticing or acknowledging that we were coming up the road. It seemed to be on a mission though, knowing where it was going to. We slowed down to watch it go up the ridge, but it went out of sight so quickly. As we drove right by where it passed the road, we slowed down and our windows were open. A very strong, unpleasant odor of rotting meat and wet dog wafted through the car. It was strong. The best way to describe it to you is like opening a dumpster with rotting meat or fish in it. If you live near a lake or park on a lake, you might know what I'm talking about. It's like that. Opening the lid and this mass of putrefaction hitting you in the face all at once. We both gagged, but it only lingered for maybe 5 seconds. But gosh, it was strong. We still talk about it to this day. Have no idea what it was. I had a nightmarish experience when I was much younger. I was in my early 20s at the time, and driving around, exploring in my beat-up 1990 Ford F-250. That thing has zero suspension, so when you drove over bumps and humps, you as hell felt it. That truck could take a beating, which is why I drove it out all over the place. I would often try and drive down old abandoned roads, logging roads, and any other roads that had been deemed unsafe or had been left for some time. I just loved exploring. There would be days I would explore old game trails off of logging roads for miles on end. No, not in my truck, on foot of course. But this particular time, I was exploring around the mountains near me, where there are many logging roads that I hadn't even explored yet. One of them I drove down was very long and windy, and I came upon a large timber clearing, maybe 5 or so football fields in length, or size at least. My attention is immediately pulled to my left, where not far away, I see these huge black wolves ripping this full-blown bull elk to pieces, just ripping chunks of meat right off of its flesh. It was already dead and was probably a fresh kill. I slow down to a crawl, trying to see what the hell kind of wolves those are, when they all look up at me, at my truck, in unison. I knew right then and there, these were not wolves. These were ugly motherfuckers. Their faces resembled that of a hyena mixed with a wolf. Very scary and very fierce-looking faces. All of them had the most piercing of yellow eyes. That's when all of them, probably 8 or 9, stand up on their hind legs and start to slowly walk towards my truck, as if angry at the aggressor who just interrupted their meal. I slam on reverse as hard as I can, and I'm flying so hard through that logging road in reverse. I'm amazed my axles came back in one piece. They should have been busted or bent from how hard I was going and hitting bumps. I get back to the main road, and I'm not even looking back to see if they followed me. Hell no. To think back on something I've tried to shun out of my mind now for well over 20 years is painful. It was so frightening. There's nights I don't sleep well and have reoccurring nightmares, and I just go back to thinking about these things. The sheer power of these animals. It was like I was in an African safari, watching lions rip the meat off a zebra. The power these animals had to just rip huge chunks of meat off this big bull elk like it was Play-Doh. Had I stuck around and they got to me, I probably would have been next on the dinner menu. I'll end my story with an interesting piece of information I found out much later on. I don't hunt myself, but I have many friends that do, and have for a very long time in the area. I guess the game hunting in that area isn't near as good as it used to be. Much of the elk that populated the area has dwindled significantly in population, along with the deer population in the last 10 years. There has not been enough of an increase in poaching or illegal hunting to justify that much of a loss in both species. Many speculate both deer and elk have moved out of the area, most likely due to an unseen predator like mountain lions. The problem is no one has really seen a mountain lion around in the area for quite some time. I guess they're pretty rare, and we got a bunch of critters down this way. I speculate that there's probably more of those wolf things around, and they just might be a contributing factor to the ever-declining elk and deer population. This is just my perspective. My father, I, and my younger sister were driving back and forth between Washington State and Idaho. We were in the process of moving to central Idaho from eastern Washington, since my dad started a new career out there. We were traveling with him, making multiple trips, getting everything we had from the old house. This was in the springtime. The only reason I remember that is because it was rainy. Things were very lush and green, and all the flowers were in full bloom. I'm unsure if that has any effect at all on the actual reason behind what happened, but just something to note. My sister and I were in the back seat. I think she was sleeping, I'm not sure. I was just bored, looking out my side of the window. My dad had the radio going, listening to music I didn't like. Half paying attention, my eyes catch what looks to be a really, really large black bear, sitting or maybe crouching a little bit up on this hill right by a large boulder and trees, just watching the road intently. Black bears are pretty common up here in the northwestern area of this country. I wasn't surprised, but as I looked more and more, I could see that there were details of whatever it was I was looking at that didn't look normal. It looked unusually large and muscular. As we drove, because the angle it was at, we were kind of getting closer to it, giving me a better look. It indeed was crouching and looked like a large dark-colored dog, not a bear. Its head really resembled that of a German shepherd, or a wolf, I guess. Wild hair, large ears. It was oddly shaped too. As I'm saying this, I mentioned to my dad that there's a large bear dog thing up on the hill watching traffic. My dad, totally off in his own world, just responds with, "That's nice, son." I rolled my eyes, and I kept watching it until we drove out of sight. It barely moved its head, but was focused on watching traffic the entire time. We had driven this road multiple times in the past week, and I seriously doubted what I was seeing was ever there before. I was sure I would have noticed it before. I don't think I put too much thought into what it really was. Life just kind of went on, and I forgot about it. I did think about it, though, from time to time, thinking I had seen a strange, possibly unknown species of animal, but I was never sure. About 8 or 9 years ago, after learning about so many resources online about strange animals and sightings, began my obsession for answers. The closest that I could come up with that is remotely close to what others describe as the Dogman. I didn't get enough clear details of its body to accurately and for sure say that that is what I saw, although much of the details of the head are spot on with some Dogman descriptions. There's even an actual account that I read a few years back, I can't remember where, but a person in Tennessee having an almost identical situation to what happened to me. Driving around with their family and saw a Dogman-like humanoid watching the highway. I thought that to be a pretty trippy thing. I can't say for sure these are Dogmen, but it is for sure something out of the realm of our normal. I've never seen an animal like that. I know it wasn't a bear, it wasn't a wolf, and it was not a dog. Its shape was too weird, and the size was all off. I'm probably not the only one who had seen it either. It was daytime, and there was traffic on the road. Anyone who looked over to the right in the correct spot would have seen it, sitting up there watching traffic. Like many encounters I read through and see, many have very negative experiences with these beings. I wasn't scared or anything. It just makes me curious about the aspect of nature we know nothing about, which is a lot. Think of all the undiscovered species in the world that we don't even know about yet. In fact, I think it was only a few years back, scientists discovered a plethora of undiscovered species of animal off an island of Madagascar or something like that. You'll have to Google it, I don't remember. Maybe as more and more people have sightings and encounters, we can finally begin to put together piece by piece what exactly we have in our midst. A close family friend of mine had this encounter that I've been wanting to type up and tell you about. This was about 2 years back. Just recently retold me the events that happened, so I wanted to write them to you while they were still fresher in my memory. I believe this was a Dogman that he saw. He's driving back from his girlfriend's house late at night. He has to get up around 5 a.m. for work the next day, so he wasn't over too late. He said it was around 10:20 when he left her house at night, and he has to drive through this long rural area. Well, more of a rural road to get back to where he lives. Not very rural, but rural enough to where the houses are spaced far enough apart. There weren't any streetlights out there, and virtually no other cars on the road that night. The area has trees, brush and dense vegetation, but not so overly thick you can't see. There were fields throughout here as well. I know for a fact the area he told me about is a big blackberry picking area in the summertime, around August-September when they're ripe. Lots and lots of bramble patches. The other thing is, he had driven the road multiple times already at this point. It wasn't new to him. Not only had he been driving it just from being in the area, but had been dating this girl for like a year or two and made the trip often. Never once had he experienced anything like what happened this night. So he's on this road. It's nighttime. He hears this big crashing sound of trees behind his car, looks in his rearview mirror, and his heart drops in his stomach. Running after his car at full speed was what he thought to be a dog. It came crashing out of the trees and bushes after his vehicle. It sprang out, landed in the middle of the road, and was leaping towards his vehicle. He smashes the gas pedal, going 80 miles at slowest, if not more on this road, trying to outrun whatever this is. He says when he saw it, he just saw these red glowing eyes on this massive dog-looking shape. It was on all fours. Even though it was a dog shape, it was so big that it didn't make sense. It was tall on all fours, as the top of his car. It followed his vehicle and kept up with him for a couple of miles on this road, even slowing down when he slowed down. But it kept pace and kept leaping at his car, as if it was trying to tackle his car, but purposefully not. He just said it didn't make sense. Between going Rambo on the road and keeping his eyes in the rearview mirror on this thing, he somehow made it. At one point or another, between darting his eyes between the road and this thing in the mirror, it vanished. He was so terrified that he told me he soiled himself, had to get the car detailed afterwards. That's pretty much it. Creeps me out when he tells it to me every time. Hopefully, you and your listeners enjoyed this story. Thanks.